Welcome to Text Readings with Greg Stafford, where we progressively work our way through the ancient biblical records. Our objective is to learn more about the God of the Bible, to look at the texts that are attributed to his people and things that are attributed to him, that he did and said with those people, and make sure that we understand them historically, in context, and that we have at least some basis for believing that they're accurate. We want the best available evidence to tell us about our history, about the things that people in our history did, the gods they worshipped, and whether or not it makes sense. And so we've been doing text readings. We started with some of my translations of New Testament documents because they were begun from what I was doing in other places just by presenting written texts. So we started doing video discussions while I was in the New Testament. And then we worked our way back through the Old Testament, starting with Genesis. And I had translated a decent portion of Genesis, several sections of Exodus, parts of Deuteronomy, and I've done one small section of Joshua. But there's a reason why I did it. Because it contains an encounter between someone we know from the biblical record as Joshua, the one who took over after Moses died, and an angel. Not just any angel. The angel is described uniquely. The angel describes itself uniquely. Not that the descriptions are not found elsewhere. They seem to be unique to a certain being, to this being in tonight's reading, a being that we read about in other recent readings, like the redo show I did recently of Exodus 23, where we talked about the angel of Jaho, an angel who was especially assigned by the God of the Bible to go ahead of the people whom he freed from Egypt under Moses and to guide them. And they were to listen to that angel because the angel, God said, had God's name in him. So the angel effectively, as you read the rest of the accounts from that point forward and even preceding it, like we did in that video and in other videos I've done recently discussing these different texts about this angel and other angels, the angel then in fact speaks as if he is God to those people and acts as God to those people. Like Moses acted as God to the Egyptians and to the people, but even more so. Because this angel can kill even Moses. This angel can pardon or not pardon any of the people. And in fact, it appears to be the angel that does not allow or that accepts the will of God, who tells that angel not to allow Moses to enter the promised land, along with all the other valiant men, the men of war, who left with them from Egypt because they were rebellious against that angel. That was the angel punishing them because the angel had that authority from the one who could punish them. Exodus 23, 20 through 23. I just did a video about it. That angel who could do all those things appears to be the same angel who is said to have done another thing, and that is have a dispute with the devil himself. So what kind of angel are we talking about? What kind of angel is this being? Who was the angel that disputed with the devil, and what were they disputing about? I want you to consider some of these questions. Take with you what you learned if you were able to read or watch my video on Exodus 23 and what we learned about that angel in those texts and in other texts that we read about that angel and other angels who had similar functions. But the angel in Exodus 23 is given special authority to speak and act for God, to lead the people into the land and to fight against their enemies. Just like the angel in Daniel that's called Michael, the Archangel, the great prince, the prince of you people, is said to have fought with the enemies of Israel. The exact thing that the God of the Bible says his angel in Exodus 23 is going to do for those people. That's what it says Michael does for those people. What does it say about this angel this evening? Who is this angel in our reading of Joshua 5, 13 through 15? Well, to bring us up to speed a little bit, since we read about the angel from Exodus 23, as that angel begins to lead the people and they reach the point where they're entering the land that was promised to their forefathers, the people die who were a part of the group that left Egypt, but that rebelled against that angel or against God, as represented by that angel. And Moses also eventually dies. And after Moses dies, Joshua takes over for basically the same role as Moses had, leading the people. Now, something very important happens before the events of our reading this evening. But I want you to understand, before we read Joshua 5:13 through 15 this evening, the events that have happened. In particular, a few specific events. The appointing of the angel in a specific, more authoritative way from Exodus 23 forward. And the angel already had quite a bit of authority, if not the same authority to that point, but it's explicitly given to that angel in Exodus 23 to lead the people forward, to fight the enemies, just like Michael in Daniel against the princes of Greece and Persia. So here we have that angel given that special assignment to lead these people. We have that angel now in our reading this evening appearing to the new human leader of these people, Joshua. And this is right after the people take over the city of Jericho. And if you look on my playlist on CW Jaho, you'll find a playlist about the historicity of the Bible and the things that it describes. And in particular, you'll see a video about the account in the book of Joshua concerning Jericho, and how archaeology has shown that the descriptions provided about the walls of Jericho, the homes on and at the base and around the walls, like we read where Rahab the prostitute lived when the two men came to her to spy out the land. We have archaeology that fits exactly what is described, as well as the type of food and things that were stored there to withstand a siege like they were going through. So we have archaeology that we can use to show the place and some of the features exactly as they are described for us in Joshua. The book of Joshua is represented in fairly lengthy sections, but not entirely. Part of our chapter 5 is part of our reading this evening, but not the section we're going to be reading. But the Dead Sea Scrolls, dated to about 100 BCE, represent significant portions of the book of Joshua. It's also a part of the Greek Septuagint tradition. And it is represented in the Masoretic tradition by the Aleppo Codex, which, as we know, along with the Leningrad Codex, faithfully represent the biblical record that we can show existed during the times of Jesus and the Christians and before them, right? Like in the Dead Sea, in some of the Dead Sea Scrolls and other texts that date before the 1st century. So even though the Aleppo and Leningrad codices of the Masoretic tradition date to around the 10th century, they're still over 1,000 years old and represent in almost complete detail. Now, I'm not going to say exact, right, because there are differences, but some of the differences in the text that we have in the Dead Sea Scrolls and in earlier times actually contain more material. And part of the larger tradition of the accounts that we see in the Masoretic tradition, at least in some cases. And there are differences, of course, but more often than not by far. And in the case of some books like Isaiah, we have, near complete representation. The record is consistent. Right? You don't have these gigantic variances over 1,000 years of textual tradition, or even 2,000 or more years. So we have a very faithful and accurate text tradition, complemented by archaeology. Like I was mentioning, you'll see in the video I did about Jericho. Okay, so it's very interesting, though, if you look at that video and the archaeology we have about Jericho, because it'll put you in the time that we're reading about. Of course, things were different back then, and Jericho was a magnificent city at that time. But this is where we are. Okay, this is what is happening. Moses has died. And we're going to get to an event that happened about Moses' body after our reading tonight and see how it complements it. But Moses is dead. Joshua has taken over. They've invaded Jericho. They've had the ark. They used it. They stopped the waters. And they defeated their enemies. And so now they're on the plains of Jericho, basically, in the surrounding area. And after all this has taken place, after Jaho through his angels told Joshua, I'm going to make you great. I'm going to make you great, just like I made Moses great in the eyes of the people. So I'm going to make you great. Have courage. And that's what he does. He goes, right? And so after these things happen, right, after the priests stop the water, after the armies pass, they get the rocks, they go through these various activities in order to complete the mission. This is what takes place. Right? So if you're Joshua, right, you've been given the role of Moses, right? You're number one now in terms of the eyes of the people, and in the role of what is being done with you by this God, who has assigned this angel to lead you all. And now you've taken over Jericho. Now that angel and Jaho have shown the people how great you are. You're Joshua. Now you're on the plains of Jericho. Verse 13, Hebrew text. Then it came about that Joshua happened to be near Jericho. And he lifted up his eyes, and he saw and behold a man standing in front of Joshua, and his sword was drawn in his hand. Then Joshua began to walk toward this man with the sword in his hand. And he began to ask him, are you for us or for our enemies? Verse 13, Greek translation. Then it came about as Joshua, and then Joshua in Greek is Jesus. Which might be, in my opinion, why we don't have a whole lot of representation of Joshua in the 1st or 2nd century CE or 3rd. I mean, it's a book that has the name Jesus in it all over the place, right? So it just seems like it would be an object more of attack by those who didn't appreciate the Messiah. Either way, we have good representation, as I reviewed earlier, but there is a kind of a gap there, and sometimes I wonder if it has to do with the frequent use of the Messiah's name. Then it came about as Joshua was in the area of Jericho. As he raised his eyes, he saw a man who had been standing in front of him. Okay, so you're Joshua. Remember this? You've conquered Jericho. The angel of Jaho. Jaho is there. The priest, the ark, all the miracles. It's all working. You've had Moses. He's dead now, but it's still working. You're moving into the land. Now there's a man in front of him with a sword in his hand. And then Joshua says to the man, Greek text, are you with us or are you with our enemies? So what does this tell us? Joshua doesn't really know right now what's going on, right? So he knows there's an angel, but that angel's really been speaking with Moses. Maybe Joshua hasn't had the kind of encounter with that angel because he was just appointed in place of Moses by Jaho through the angel, but he hasn't had this kind of encounter yet. Now that angel, Jaho, of course, but they've seen Joshua in action. Now, this was the day. This was the day that Joshua became great in the eyes of the people. Not before, today. And the angel even had, after all those who had left Egypt and were rebellious and they had died, he had the people, they were circumcised the second time because they hadn't been circumcised in the desert. Things are changing. This new group is being prepared to go into the place that was promised. Now, the group that doesn't belong there is past. And so, this man with the sword in his hand approaches Joshua, and Joshua's now encountering this being, wants to know if he can't tell. There's something about this being Joshua can't tell. Are you with us or are you with our enemies? He's got his sword. It's very important to remember the sword in the hand. Right, man? Of course, the angel that Jaho signed in Exodus 23, what? Was given the authority to not pardon. Pardon, not pardon. He will not pardon you. You better listen. Don't mess around with this angel, right? It's exactly what Jaho said. Well, look at this being. Verse 14, Hebrew text. Then the man standing before Joshua began to say, right? Joshua wants to know, are you with us or for our enemies? Because you seem very threatening, right? It seems like it. The man began to say, I am not for your enemies. He doesn't really say I'm with you, right? Because these are sinful people. They're with them. They're taking care of them. This is for the Messiah's body. But the angels are not really, other than understanding us and being with us, but remember, this angel is not messing around for good reason. Jaho, through him, is in town with these people, the ark, the special presence, defeating the other sons of God, preparing the body, the seed. This is what was all promised to happen. I am not for your enemies because I am the royal ruler of the spirit army of Jaho, or army. The Hebrew text is Sar Tzabe Yahuwah. Sar Tzabe Yahuwah. Sar, prince, royal ruler of the army, like Tzabaoth, Jehovah of armies. But I believe it's Sar Tzabe Yahuwah. So that's what he's saying to Joshua. I am that. I am the Sar Tzabe Yahuwah. Now I have come. Then Joshua began to fall with his face to the ground and bow down and say to this Sar Tzabe Yahuwah, what does my Lord have to say to his servant? Verse 14, Greek translation, but the man said to Joshua, I am the chief commander, the archgeneral, the archestrategos of the spirit powers of Lord Jaho, or of the powers, right, of Jaho. Depends on how you look at it, army, powers, in terms of the people, and whether you see that at him as the one ruling the army of Israel, or as not only that, but as the army of Jehovah of armies, of the spirit armies of Jaho. We'll get into that another time, but it could be either one. And either way, he is certainly the commander of those who are here with Joshua. And so whether or not you see archgeneral as the same as archangel, the fact is that this angel is an angel because it's representing Jaho, and it's leading the people. And they're in battle. This angel was just with them, presumably, if this is the angel of Jaho, which we'll talk about more in a moment, that just helped them defeat the people of Jericho. And so the angel's role, in terms of the translation of archestrategos versus archangelos, archgeneral versus archangel, chief general, chief angel. They're not really too different, especially not in this context. Because as the messenger of Jaho, as the chief messenger, he's leading these armies of people. And so, again, while there's a difference, there's not much of one or enough of one to make it a distinction beyond just noting the potential application for the military aspect of general versus messenger, apart from a military function that is present here. And so, either way, it's consistent with archangel. It's the prince of the army of Jaho. We know that Michael is the prince of you people, Daniel 10:21, and the great prince who stands up on behalf of Israel, Daniel 12. So if the angel of Jaho in Exodus 23 is assigned to lead the Israelites and fight the Israelites' enemies, and this angel appears to Joshua right after that happens, right after the angel of Jaho from Exodus 23 leads the people against Jericho and defeats their enemies, here is the angel that is calling itself the prince of Jaho's army. So if this angel is the angel of Jaho is the prince of the army. The angel of Jaho is a prince right here, explicitly. It goes on to say in the Greek text, then Joshua fell upon his face upon the ground. It doesn't use proskuneo. It uses pipto, to fall down, to the ground, tes ges. So it basically defines proskuneo, right? It doesn't have to use the specific verb proskuneo if the actions are, by definition, proskuneo. Just like we saw in my prior videos where we reviewed the accounts of angels and how the angels who visited Lot in the account of Sodom, he proskuneoed them according to the Septuagint all the way to the ground. And here we have Joshua, it doesn't use proskuneo, but what proskuneo is, he does to this angel all the way to the ground. So Trinitarians, when you argue, as you sometimes often do, very strongly and wrongly too, that when Jesus is proskuneoed to in the New Testament, even to the ground, that makes him God. That's not true. Not only are you ignoring the examples in the Hebrew Scriptures which show that angels, and specifically two angels in the case of Lot and Sodom, and this angel, the prince of the army of Jaho in Joshua, are given proskuneo all the way to the ground. You have Jesus telling his own followers in Revelation 3 that's what they're going to receive. So try to keep things in context, all right? So we don't have to keep arguing about the same things all the time. We need to move on. Right? Use these accounts. If they're not enough to convince you about Jesus being the archangel, well, then note the parts about proskuneo so you can stop bothering us about that, okay? Or at least have it correctly understood and not keep telling people that has to mean Trinity, because it doesn't. Now notice the rest of the Greek part of verse 14. Joshua, after bowing down all the way to the ground, says to this prince of the army of Jaho, master. And the Greek term is despotes. It's not kyrios. It's more rare in the New Testament, but it's a term that basically means the same thing, a little more so, maybe a little more honorary, you could say, more uniquely, or it depends on which book and which time period you're referring to. But in any case, it's not used as often as kyrios is. And so I'll point out why that's important in a moment. But that's what in the Greek text is used here for this angel, despotes. And then Joshua says, what do you command to your servant? Verse 15, our last text of tonight's reading, and we'll talk more about it, some other texts. Then the royal ruler of the army of Jaho began to say to Joshua, remove your sandals from upon your feet, for the place on which you stand is sacred. Then Joshua did just as he was told. Verse 15, Greek translation. Then the chief commander of Lord Jaho said to Joshua, you must remove the sandals from your feet, because the place on which you have stood is holy. And that is very similar, if not identical, to what we read in Exodus 3, when, as we are told further in the book of Acts, chapter 7, angels communicated the law and spoke to Moses out of the burning bush. But in verse 5, before those angels do that, it says right here, it says Jehovah, but remember in verse 4, or rather verse 2, it says, then Jehovah's angel appeared to him in a flame of fire in the midst of a thorn bush. So you don't even need Acts to tell you it's angels. It says so right here. Although Acts does say angels, plural, and angel. Either way, it goes on to then say Jehovah, right? Because they're both used interchangeably, since that's who the angel is to these people, to Moses. But then in verse 5, the angel, right, verse 2, says exactly what the prince of the army of Jaho says. Do not come near, or rather draw your sandals from off your feet, because the place where you're standing is holy ground. Now granted, it could be another angel saying the same thing about the ground, because it's just the way they are. But we already know that we have at least one specific angel appointed from Exodus 23 forward in a way that fits with the prince of the army of Jaho that we just read about, who says the exact same thing we're reading about right here, that the angel who appeared in the bush says to Moses. So we have a connection even earlier than the Exodus 23 based on the words used. And so if we go back to our text reading, we have a couple of things here, right? So we know in the New Testament that we have Jesus presented with a sword, right? He's got a sword coming out of his mouth. He's got a sickle, right? He's presented with a sword. While that's not alone a significant enough feature to say, okay, it's the exact same being we have here, why would this angel have a sword? Well, we know it just got through fighting with Jericho on behalf of the people and whatever spirit may have been involved there, because that's what it was assigned to do, right? Exodus 23, it was very explicit. He will go ahead of you and fight for you. And then that's what happens. Well, there's something else that happened, and that while it may not be specifically why the angel's holding the sword right here, there might be a reason why that sword could come in handy, beyond just in the physical sense for human beings. Let's take a quick look at the book of Jude. All right, so Jude in the New Testament, in this case represented by the text of P72, which I have translated the whole thing. So if you want a copy of my translation of Jude, you can find it on my discussion forum, or just let me know, and I'll send you a PDF copy. All right, so now in the book of Jude, we're going to come back here to verse 4 in a minute for a good reason, but let's stick with this whole idea of this prince with the sword and why that might be the case. Why is the prince of the army of Jaho and Joshua, this angel, why does it have that sword? Maybe just because it's there, it's in battle, like we talked about, right? Wants Joshua to know it's not messing around. Maybe there's more going on. Maybe there's more that the angel has to deal with, or had to deal with. Look at verse 9 of Jude, the letter of Jude. It talks about how when Michael the Archangel was disputing with the devil as they considered Moses' body. We know that before the account in Joshua 5, and before Joshua was made great in the eyes of the people, Moses died. Very, recently before the events we read this evening. The angel appearing to Joshua after taking Jericho, after being made great in the eyes of the people. Not too long before that, Moses died. And according to the New Testament, if you're a Christian, if you're not a Christian, this may not apply, but it's a historical record. We have text of Jude, right? In this case, P72. I've translated it. It's represented well. If you're a Christian and you accept Jude in the New Testament, you believe Michael was there when Moses died, or at least after, and the body was there, and Satan arrived and felt he had authority as the one appointed to be the one given authority to give authority, but not over these people, right? These are God's people. Michael has authority, not the devil. But the devil can try. Of course he would. Because he would think that Moses is a sinful person. He's an adversary. He's going to argue his kid. That's what they do. They're going to represent things in ways that Jaho would have to judge. And what does Michael say? May Jaho judge you. Right? And so, Michael, though, disputed with the devil because what? Michael had ownership of the people. He's their prince, Daniel 10:23. The angel of Jaho who was given authority to pardon and not pardon. Who else would be given that authority but the one who would have the right to dispute about what to do with one of the people he could pardon or not pardon? And so when the main one of those people died and the main adversary arrived, the main one disputed with that guy. Not in any sense, but as the reference. Michael disputed with that guy, the devil. Because Michael had possession of his people. He's their prince. He's the prince appearing to Joshua with his sword in his hand, possibly not just because of the human threat, right? He's been disputing with the devil himself. And it's not gone pleasantly. They're arguing over the body of the leader of the people Michael is the prince of. Michael goes and fights against the princes of Greece and Persia. No one can stand with Gabriel but Michael. Michael stands against the devil during a time when the angel of Jaho is given his name to pardon or not pardon the people, and appears to Joshua as the prince, Tsar. Michael is the prince, Tsar. Tsar Gadol, the great prince, Hasar Hagadol. Daniel 12. Joshua 5. The prince of the army of Jaho is the prince of Israel. The angel of Jaho is given the people to guide them and lead them and to dispute with them with beings like the devil. And he's not only given the people in those ways, but he's referred to and treated in ways that only really apply to one other being. And that is how the Son of God himself is treated. Not just in terms of the proskuneo and the bowing low as this angel is given here in the New Testament. Not just because the Son of God, according to Isaiah 9, the Messianic text, is said to be the one on whom the princely rule would come. The angel of great counsel, LXX, Septuagint, mighty God, basically the same thing. It says that angel of great counsel, that mighty God, would have the princely rule come to be on his shoulders. Well, who had the princely rule before the Messiah got it? It looks to me like the same being had it. The same being who came to his own people, to his own home, through whom they were made, according to John 1. Like we talked about in my part 15 of the Bible and the Treaty and Conflict series. The connections are so strong and clear. And look here, in our reading we saw what? That Joshua referred to that angel, not just as the archgeneral in the Greek text, which is very similar to archangel, term, not only just word but function as well. Here a little more military sense. But certainly in terms of the Hebrew text, you have Sar, the prince, just like you have with Daniel, your prince, the great prince, and with Isaiah, the princely rule. You have this angel, the prince of the army of Jaho, called Despotes. So we not only have this angel appearing to Joshua after Moses has died with a sword in his hand, which would fit the context in which he's not only battling the people of Jericho on behalf of Jaho, as he was assigned to do in Exodus 23, but he's, according to Jude, been fighting with the devil over Moses' body. And Jude refers to that angel as Michael, which connects the angel of Jaho and the prince of the army of Jaho with Michael in terms of time and description, Sar. And I would say archgeneral, archangel, but certainly Sar. And Despotes, master. What do you command? Master. Despotes. Why is that term so significant? Because, as we've been reading in the letter of Jude, not only does Jude specifically teach, according to our earliest Christian traditions and texts and people, right, the New Testament, that Michael was the angel leading the people and disputing over the leader of those people's body. But Jesus, when he speaks of him in the opening of this letter, is referred to as our absolute ruler and Lord. But absolute ruler is that term from Joshua 5, Despotes. Here, in a context where Michael is identified as the very angel who's called Despotes in Joshua 5, we get Jesus referred to as our Despotes. So the connections are all over the place. We have connections with the angel of Jaho having God's name in him, and Jesus being given the name above every name to God's glory, not to him, Philippians 2. Just like the angel being given God's name in the Hebrew Scriptures is not for that angel, it's for you know who, and that angel knows that too. That angel is called Tsar, Prince of the army of Yahweh. Just like in Daniel 10:21 and Daniel 12. Where Michael, the archangel, is called Sar. Just like this prince in our reading. And just like this prince, Michael is referred to it with that chief description, arch, right? Chief, main one. Despotes, our absolute ruler, our master. The descriptions that are given to the angel of Jaho in Exodus 23 and in Joshua chapter 5, 13 through 15, combined with Daniel chapter 10 and Daniel chapter 12, when looked at in light of the New Testament, specifically as we've reviewed this evening, the letter of Jude, where it is said that Michael did things and Jesus is called things that are consistent with the prince of the army of Jaho we read about this evening, it seems fairly obvious, combined with all the other evidence that we have reviewed as part of this video series and other video series, that Jesus, in his pre-human existence, was not only the angel of Jaho, not only the prince of the army of Jaho, but the despotes that prince was, and the archgeneral and archangel, that the only other prince described in the same way was namely Michael, that conclusion appears fairly clear and consistent. It doesn't require any strained application of texts, any reading back into the text, any particular view. It's just consistent with what these texts tell us was the view of the people who believed and who wrote these things, so that we would know what we needed to think when it came to these angels and the God that they represented in everything they did and in everything they do, so that we don't have a problem with it. That's a good feeling. That's why we're able to identify these beings as God in the same way that we read about other people referring to these beings when they represent God, not because we believe in another God, but because we, like these angels, we, like the prince of the army of God, believe there is no other way to be and no other God to worship than Jah.